Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar with interview with Mary Keithahn and John Horman. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. And I'm going to invite John to turn on his camera so we can see him. There he is. And we're going to have a very nice conversation today. I think we had a little bit of trouble getting started, but here we are. So I want to just let you know who we're talking to. Mary and John have collaborated on various church music projects over the past 40 years, and they both have long been active in the Hymn Society, mainly because of their contributions to hymnody for children. Mary is a retired United Church of Christ pastor and educator, a volunteer church musician, a curriculum writer, a journalist, and a lyricist who has recently moved from the Black Hills of South Dakota to Sioux Falls to be closer to her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. John is an accomplished musician, composer, and music teacher. He served as a minister of music for 50 years and taught in public schools for 27. He's composed more than 200 published choral anthems and wrote the music for 2 collections. It's really great to have them with us today. And I want to invite all of you who are attending today also to join in the conversation. You can write your comments in the chat feature of Zoom. But if you have questions, try to use the Q&A feature. That's also at the bottom of your screen. So I'll be looking at both of those as we go through. Probably save most of the questions and comments for the end, but if there's something that's really pressing, I'll sort of insert that into the conversation as we go. So welcome to you both. It's good to be with you.
Nice to be here.
So I kind of like to talk a little bit to start about how each of you kind of got into all this, a little bit about your early background, family, church, school, like what drew you to music, to church, and to singing together. Mary, why don't we ask you first?
I grew up in Gaylord, Minnesota, which is a little town in south central Minnesota in a rural community. My mother was a Sunday school superintendent. My dad was a church treasurer, so we were in church every Sunday, and there was no children's time. We stayed from the time we could sit in the pew. We were in church, so I was exposed to hymns early on, and we had. In Sunday school came after church, and we had a little opening worship, and a lot of the children's songs were set to hymn tunes, so I got used to those early. I loved our organist pianist. She was a pianist first, and she would always sing along with the hymns with obvious joy when she accompanied them. So I got the idea that hymn singing was something that was fun to do and was very meaningful in my life. I learned to play hymns on the piano, and then when we got an organ in the church, a Conn electronic organ, which was a big deal for us, I learned to play hymns there. I went to a public high school, and in Minnesota, a lot of the public high school teachers were graduates of Lutheran colleges like St. Olaf and Luther with great choral traditions. So we sang a lot of hymn arrangements and also sang a lot of hymns in Vespers, which were every Sunday night. So my mother also gave me copies of hymnology books, and one was for children. They sang a new song so I got interested in the history of hymns, who wrote them and why also.
I think some of our we have a couple of our Lutheran friends are online today and attending, so I'm sure they're going to be really happy to hear about the Lutheran influence on your work. Hey, John, so how about you? How'd you get into all this?
I was born in a small town in Western Maryland, and the proximity to Hagerstown, where the Moeller organ factory was, made a Moeller sort of a name that everyone knew as an organ maker. And Dr. Lindsay went from town to town in Western Maryland teaching students how to play the organ. And every church had a little Moeller organ in it. So Dr. Lindsay would come 2 mornings a week. We were excused from school. I didn't have to go to school until 9:30 in the morning. On the morning I took my lesson. And I learned to play the organs from the age of 12 on. There's a Lutheran tradition in my family too, but only because the Reformed Church of Christ would not allow me to use the organ at their church for practice because I wasn't old enough to be a member. My mother had membership there, and they still denied me the use of the organ. And my mother marched me down the street around the corner, and we became members of the Lutheran Church because the Lutheran parson or pastor allowed me to use the organ there. So I grew up in that town and went to school there, and then went to the University of Maryland, where I ran into Emmylou Deemer, who was a beginning teacher at the University of Maryland at that time, and she became my organ teacher. That was kind of a fluke, but a wonderful, wonderful fluke. Met a number of people through her and ended up meeting Alice Parker and then studying with her. And it sort of went from there. I ran into Mary through the Choristers Guild because I was interested in children's music. And Mary was the secretary, and I was the treasurer for a while, and then the vice president of the board, and then on to the president of the board. And we collaborated on our first musical and anthems there. Mary had written songs for teaching Sunday school, written the words, and asked me if I would set her texts. And that's sort of where I started out setting Keithahn texts.
So I'm curious about, I mean, both of you have worked with children and have written specifically for children. So I wonder, Mary, how did, your first early experiences in leadership, working with children as, say, a pastor, a song.
Well, I've always I started out focusing more on education than pastoral ministry. I was not ordained until after my husband, who was a pastor, died. We'd always worked as a team. He was the pastor and I was the teacher. And I always did a lot of music. I had never had a children's choir. I had the opportunity to be in a children's choir myself. So it was important for me to provide this experience for children in the church. And Alice Lyon in Billings, Montana was the influential in getting me into Choristers Guild, and Austin Lovelace influenced me through Choristers Guild to become a member of the Hymn Society. And they both had a real influence in the kinds of things we did for children too.
Interesting.
And when John and I were on the publications committee for the Choristers Guild, we developed our Heritage of Hymns, which was a 2-year series of resources to help children learn eight basic hymns from the church. And we involved a lot of Hymn Society members in helping us with that project. There were a lot of support resources in addition to, just the hymn studies. There were anthems and musical and worship resources, dance and use of different kinds of orff instruments and other instruments.
Yeah, I'll talk to you more kind of stuff going further on, but I want to get back to John and talk a little bit about how you your early leadership. I mean, you have been well known as both a music educator and a children's choir composer and director. I wonder, can you say a little bit about how that all sort of came together at the beginning?
Well, back in the day, as they would say, you couldn't really make a living and raise a family on a teacher's salary. So when I went to the University of Maryland, they said, "What instrument do you want to play?" And I said, "Pipe organ." And they said, "No, you really don't." And so they tried to talk me out of it because I knew that I needed a supplementary job. And I had played in church back in my hometown, Middletown in Western Maryland. So I then I went to Congress Heights United Methodist, was their organist for 3 or 4 years. and then went on to Warner Church, where I stayed 43 years. And the pastor at Warner said, "We need a children's choir here, and I want you to see if you can start one." And until that point, I had had only secular music experiences with teaching children to sing. But that switched me over to the sacred area. And I guess I should clarify something. If I have to water or boil down my belief system, I guess I will always believe that singing unites people no matter what their backgrounds. If we can sing the same songs, if we can agree on what song to sing, and then sing the same song, somehow we are united through the singing of that song. And whether it's in an elementary school situation or a middle school situation or a children's choir or a youth choir or an adult choir, there is a bonding that takes place physiologically, psychologically, and spiritually when people sing even Home on the Range together there. And that has motivated me all of my life. I still think people are their best angels. They are the best humans they can be when they are joined in song. I probably said too much.
No, not at all.
In the same way, I'd like to comment that I've always believed that worship is the work of the people. And singing is part of that work. Singing hymns is part of that work. And it's part of what it's a way we learn. It's a way we express our faith. It's a way we express our emotions. It's a way God speaks to us. And so hymns, that's why hymns have always been so important to me, other than the fact that I love singing.
So how did you two meet, and how did you figure out that you wanted to work with each other?
Well, I was bemoaning the fact when I was writing church school curriculum that there was no budget to hire composers to write music to the new little songs we needed. And we were using Bingo and Old MacDonald Had a Farm tunes, and I thought we needed something better than that. And John heard me complain, and he offered to set them for nothing. And so that's how we started.
I mean, those were the days when children sang, "There was a Savior, had a name, and Jesus was his name. Oh,
Right.
J-E-S-U-S." And I'm going, "Oh no!" So
I
the
said,
need
oh,
for
God.
the need for singable tunes that were well crafted but simple enough that children could remember them. And I think the transition then to writing hymn tunes that are sophisticated and well crafted enough to be appealing and still memorable, there's a crossover there that I managed to make that I think was probably very healthy career wise and professionally.
Do you remember your first project together?
Yeah. Mary?
Well, the big one was Paul and Company, the musical we wrote, I think. And my husband and I used to have to come up with ideas for a 2-week vacation Bible school that went morning and afternoons and covered from small children up through high school or junior high, and with using local teachers in the church. And we've set, I was also directing the children's choir and liked to do musicals based on Bible characters. So we combined the two, and we did, we had done a number of biblical characters where we'd have the educational component, the classes in the morning, and then we'd work on the musical in the afternoon. And if there are children that weren't in the choir, they had speaking parts or they helped with props, and they were involved also. And my husband wanted to do Paul, and there was no musical on Paul. And I think educators thought that was a subject for adults, not children. And I got the idea for a musical based on Acts 16, the visit to Paul's visit to Philippi and everything that happened after that. And so when I got on the Choristers Guild board, I was trying to interest some of the composers there in doing that musical. And John said, well, if I would write the libretto and the text for the song text, he would take a crack at setting it. And that's
Well, I asked Mary at that time. So, tell me more about the story. And then she told me all about the exorcism, and then they were all in prison, and there was an earthquake and a baptism, and so she outlined all the things that happened in that story. And I said, that's Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade, and that's going to be popular if we can get it going. So I thought this is going to make a great church musical because it's got all the ingredients of an adventure story.
That's pretty cool. You did a number of music, right?
Oh, quite a few.
Yeah, about a dozen of them. One was on a historical Reformation couple, but the rest were all biblical characters.
Uh-huh. But John, did you actually go out there and work with Mary, or did you do this remotely?
Well, we, here I'm using that term again. Back in the day, we communicated by mail, snail mail. And so we go back and forth with that, and we'd use the phone to talk, but she would send me texts, and then she'd send me lyrics, and then she'd send me libretto, and and I would write. And in those days, you didn't write on the computer; you wrote it all by hand. And I wrote lead sheets for all of the solos, and then the choral parts I wrote out, and I would send them back to her, and she'd read through them. But by the time we were putting the musical together in the summer at a camp in Placerville, in the Black Hills, we had lead sheets and we had written out choral parts, and we had a script. We auditioned on Sunday night. We started work on Monday morning. By Wednesday, they were off script. By Friday, it was memorized, and all the scenery and costumes and everything was ready. And the parents came in, and we filled the chapel and did it there. And then we repeated it in the winter back in Rapid City or back in Belfouche to still iron out more wrinkles. And then we submitted after that. We never submitted unless we tried it out at least twice.
And the time in Belfouche was an interdenominational project, because it was a fundraising project for the Ministerial Association's ministry to the transients that came through the community. So we had a lot of fun seeing the other pastors often took roles in it, and it was a lot of fun.
That's pretty cool. So after you did musicals, you also have done hymns, right? For children, right?
About 300 the last time I
looked
at.
When did you turn from musicals to hymns, or was that all going on at the same time?
Well, Austin Lovelace said that we should have Paul and Silas sing a hymn when they were in jail. So we had them sing a hymn, and after that there was a hymn in every musical, and some of the songs in the musical lent themselves to hymns because I was familiar with that format. And then because I was starting to write so many texts, I decided I should take advantage of the hymn writing workshop that was offered after the seminar at St. Olaf one year that was led by Carl Daw. And that was very helpful to me as a text writer. And the hymn I wrote there was the first one that ended up in a hymnal, the United Church of Canada's hymnal.
Is that when Quiet Peace is Shattered? Was that it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If I could point out two teachers, Mary is one of my teachers, although she will never admit it, because she's constantly reminding me of things I need to remember when I'm writing. But Alice Parker would be the other one. I mean, Alice would say the rhythm is the text is the rhythm. If she said it once, she said it 1,000 times. And Mary was always saying syllables. We got to have the same number of syllables. Each each stanza needs to syllabically, that's the right word. Notice I'm not the wordsmith. I'm just the music writer. Uh, that syllabic count has got to be the same, or everybody gets their tongue in a twist in the middle of the stanza. So keeping in mind Parker and Keithahn has really helped me stay true to hymn text setting as far as music is concerned.
And John
And
helped me when I write to think about how a word is going to sound when it is sung, because sometimes that's different from the way it sounds to the ear when you speak it. And also the fact that if you write in stanzas and that the same tune is used for each stanza. So if there's a climax in the stanza, it needs to be in the same place. And you have to watch the mood of the hymn also. I really gave him a job when I wrote one hymn, a sequential hymn that started with the women at the tomb and the burial, and ended up with the joy of the resurrection. And how do you keep the same tune work for that change in mood? But John did a really good job. That was when the Easter hymn we wrote that year.
Yeah, I forget the name of it, but when she and I are writing hymns, it's sort of unpredictable. I mean, now we use computers and we're constantly. I'll set my phone on the piano and play the tune while she follows with the words. I might point out that she seldom writes a text that she doesn't use a tune that already exists to help her sing it through, so she knows what it sounds like vocally when she sings, but she never tells me the tune, because if she tells me the tune, I can't get it out of my head, and then I can't come up with a new one. So that gets that's been a sort of a tradition with us. But I never know how long it's going to take to come up with a tune to what she sent me. Sometimes it's days, and I feel like I'm beating my head against the wall. But other times she sent me texts, and 2 hours later I call her and play it, and it's already set. It's very unpredictable, and I think our standing rule is the more complex and involved that her text is, if it takes a lot of thought when you're singing her text, my tune needs to be simple. If I set it to a complex tune, a complex text and a complex tune just irritates the congregation, and they either give up on one or the other. And so I stick to that rule as well when I'm setting her texts.
so has it always been the process that you begin with the text and then go to the tune, or have you ever gone the other direction?
Very few times. Sometimes.
I called her and told her that I had heard a tune in a Rachmaninoff piano concerto, a gorgeous tune. And she, coincidentally, she said that her husband had loved that piece of music. So she then listened to it, and then I notated it and I sent it, and then she set a text. Was that on a text, Amos, about justice?
It was that Sanson tuned.
Oh, it was Sanson. It wasn't Rachmaninoff. It was Sanson.
Yeah.
It was one of the piano concertos. It just has a gorgeous melody, and I thought it ought to be a hymn tune. And I evidently thought wrong, because that was like 15 years ago and nobody's ever picked it up. But you can't control these things.
I'm curious about all that, because we have had a couple of text writers on these interviews who have said, I really like starting with a tune and writing to the tune. And not too many have said that, but enough that make me wonder about the creative process when you're doing collaboration.
Well,
I have to speak the text. I have to speak her text before I can come up with a tune, because the voice inflects as you're reading, there's a natural inflection to every text. And even as I speak right now, my voice is going up and down. And unless I can get that inflection, I don't know where the tune is going. I'm sorry, Mary, I interrupted you.
Well, I was just going to say, I'd like you to set my text because you always catch the meaning of the text in the music. For example, if you have a phrase that about the descending dove, you don't use a tune that's ascending. You kind of, it has to fit, and John does such a good job of that. I think because we've worked so long together that we understand each other, what we're aiming for too. And we often discuss a text before I even start writing it. What is the need? We've both worked in local churches all our lives in one way or another. So we write for the people we know. And I think I tend to write simply. And I work for people to find something, for a text to be accessible when people just read it for the first time, but also it's something that they can grow into the more they sing it. They'll understand more of what I'm trying to say. And so I've worked in areas where a lot of our parishioners had a high school education at best. They're intelligent people, but they don't have a wide literary background and big vocabulary. So I try to make my text accessible. That's the way I've always had to speak with people.
Mary's texts also progress from stanza to stanza to stanza. There's usually a nugget in each stanza, but there is the pot of gold is at the end, and which always makes me smile because so many pastors, when they're running out of time, will eliminate the last two verses of a hymn, which is the nugget and the pot of gold. But I know that that's the way she writes, and I'll throw in one more thing. She knows what she's doing with vowels. And I know to head for a good vowel on a higher note. So, and she knows it too. And that kind of collaboration and knowledge of one another's writing abilities and knowledge, she's intuitive at this point, right? I don't think she consciously thinks about it. Maybe she does, but I think she's done it enough that she knows the plan. And I know it too. So I'm always looking for those great O's and ahs and oohs. And boy, she puts them in there.
When you are writing tunes and texts for children, is there something distinctive about that as opposed to just general hymn writing?
Well, I don't know. That's a very good question. The relationship of child simple tunes and tunes for hymns. It brings to mind the woman that in my church in Kensington, where I was for so long, we did one of the hymns that Mary and I wrote, and it wasn't one of my best efforts at writing a tune. And on the way out of church, this woman, an older woman, nabbed me, and she said, "Well, I won't be humming that tune when I weed the garden this afternoon." And there is something to that. The ability to, I'm thinking of The Summons by John Bell, or I'm thinking Merle's tune by Hal Hobson. Those tunes stick to you, and you will hum them and sing them long after you've sung them in church on Sunday morning. And boy, those are the gems in the world of hymnody. Other tunes are not quite. They're more of a Teflon nature, and they don't stick to you.
What about you, Mary?
Always look for things like the appropriate key for the age group, and the the intervals and the melody lines, and you understand child development so well because that's that's part of your training. I think we both have enough awareness of the other's field of expertise so that it helps us to work together. Does that make
So Mary, just on this theme though, when you're writing a text, is there something distinctive about writing a text for children as opposed to writing a text for a general congregation?
Well, when I wrote curriculum, I wrote 8 courses for in the Bible Discovery curriculum that was published by 14 different major denominations. And their idea was that the Bible is for every age group. You just have to find the part in it that's relevant to the age group you're writing for. And I think I approach hymns that way. You know, we have their basic tenets of the Christian faith. You just have to figure out what is the most meaningful at this particular age group and write to that need.
I think both Mary and I give children and youth more credit for intelligence than a lot of people. This is stepping on toes. A lot of people in churches do. I think we think they're capable of understanding a lot more sophisticated ideas. For instance, Mary wrote a text about Zacchaeus, and she must have said a dozen times, "It's not about the tree," because we get hung up on the cute little things. Noah's Ark. I mean, the whole story of Noah and the flood, it's not about the animals 2 by 2. And those are cute ideas, but they've got to be ideas that are on their way to more sophisticated ideas that help build a sense of faith, community, corporate worship, whatever you're doing within your church. It's got to be part of the road that leads to it. It can't be the whole thing. And I think we stop at the tree, we stop at the ark, and we need to move on. We stop sometimes at the manger with all the cute little lambs.
And never grow beyond that in our faith.
That's true.
But where would you like to see children's, hymns for children go now? I mean, like considering what we have in our repertoire and the state of things in the churches, what do you think? What do you think people ought to be working on? And aside from yourselves, of course.
Well, I have such a love for the Bible, and everything I write starts from an idea, a key idea in my biblical theology, I guess. And that's where I start with children, and then you find what is their life like now? What are they worried about? What do they need to know in order to survive in today's world? And you kind of work with both those ideas in mind, and then what are they learning in their Sunday school classes if they go to any kind of church education? How do you support that in music? Because then you're adding some more of the senses that will help them remember things. And so it's just you take all those things into consideration, I guess. It's trying to write for where people are now, no matter what their age is.
When 9/11 occurred, Choristers Guild asked Mary to write a text that would help children get through it. And Mary, I think, if I'm not mistaken, borrowed an idea from Fred Rogers, Look for the Helpers. And somewhere in that text is reference to that. I think the tune that we eventually used to write it as a hymn is called Fred's Tune, because of that very important aspect of look for those who help. I kind of like to see us pair hymns. I think to do a simple hymn about the 99 sheep and one was missing, for children, and then a paired hymn in a service that has to do with the same idea for adults, so that when the children hear it sung, they remember what they just sang. And when the adults hear it sung, they remember what the children just sang. And it all goes together and enhances the word that's spoken for the day. That might be an idea of something that could occur. I think that would be kind of cool if we could do that.
Yeah, cool.
Like sometimes the adults get more out of the children's sermon than they do out of the adult sermon.
Yes, I.
It helps adults too.
Well, I want to turn, if I could, to the Hymn Society and ask you about your involvement in the Hymn Society. I mean, how that came to be, what kind of involvement you've had, and what that's meant for you. Mary?
Well, I've been a member so long that when I moved, I had such a stack of hymn magazines that I still couldn't part with, so they came along with me. But I think Austin Lovelace again did a hymnology session at a Choristers Guild seminar, and I got really interested in that. He told us about the Hymn Society, and that's why I joined. And I have appreciated the way people are welcomed, no matter whether they're hymn writers or church musicians or just people who love hymns. And there's just such a wonderful fellowship and acceptance and a nurturing quality that where we can learn from one another and appreciate what new people are doing and encourage them. That's just been, I've just learned so much. I've appreciated the ecumenical part of it. I've learned to appreciate the liturgies from other denominations and understand. So if I end up in that kind of a church, I can participate with understanding and enjoyment. And it's just been I went to Yale Divinity School after Carleton College. Yale Divinity School had no hymnology course at that time. So the Hymn Society has been my course in hymnology for the year.
It's true. How about you, John?
Well, I've had mentors that came right directly out of the Hymn Society, besides Mary. Alice Parker was one, and I was introduced to her by Don Hinshaw, and she was an incredible influence. There's hardly a day that goes by that if I'm sitting down and improvising or trying to write something, that I don't think of something that she said that I may not have understood when she said it, but now I do. That kind of thing. Austin Lovelace was also another person that came to mind. Helen Kemp was a major influence on me. In some ways, I find it sad that some of these people are not going to be known as well to the young church musicians coming up because they don't have the same history with them. But the Hymn Society was just chock full of them.
Yes.
And when you went to a Hymn Society convocation or conference, you ran into all of the best hymnists around, and you got to talk to all of those people whose names you only saw in hymnals, and then you realize that you don't have to be dead to write a hymn.
And also when you open a hymnal to sing it, you're singing with friends because you see their names on so many of the hymns.
So true.
And it's a contact that goes beyond the conference because, for example, when we did our third collection of hymns, we sent it to Michael Hahn to get his opinion and critique of it. And we didn't realize he was overseas at the time. But despite the fact, he sat down and wrote, took the time to write suggestions and reactions to each of the hymns that were so helpful. And then Ray Whitney and I have exchanged texts and critiqued one another's and helped one another. It's that not competitive, but cooperative attitude that I've appreciated so much and learned so much from.
My first contact with the Hymn Society was at a Westminster Choir College at whatever that conference was. And I ran into, in the middle of one of the grassy areas, I ran into Eric Routley, who I recognized from a picture I'd seen. And I had the audacity to walk up and introduce myself. And he talked to me quite a while, told me that I was, he knew I was ambitious to write hymns, but I needed to grow older in order to write better hymns. But I wrote to him and sent him hymns, and he critiqued them and sent them back. And it was amazing. They were all typed on a typewriter, and he red marked everything I sent to him, and he never asked me for anything. He was just wonderful about being able to help. And I think that helpfulness from the Hymn Society has always been there and still is. And it's a great, I want to say, breeding ground for young hymn texts and tune writers, but that's what it is. It's a fertile place for us to take root, and for especially new people coming up.
So we're running out of time, but someone has put in the question and answer, Mary. Tell us about the matching shirt group at the Hymn Society conferences. The red t-shirt ladies. Right.
Well, I happened to get acquainted with I think there were 4 women. One of them has passed away, but there were 3 others at the Hymn Society that we came every year, and we would sit and complain and encourage and talk about our situations back home and just enjoy everything and enjoy one another. We became such good friends. Well, then we started buying T-shirts every year as souvenirs of our experience. And then it was harder to find time to go shopping and so they decided, the ones for the Marilyn Parolini, especially, and Norma, decided to have shirts ready made for us with the logo on. So I have a whole host of those shirts in my wardrobe, but we wore them every year when we went to the conferences, and then every year we bought a new one, and so everybody was curious the next year what that was. It was fun.
One of the years of Hymn Society conferences.
I became their mascot.
Yeah. We hung around with us too, yeah.
Jane Best just put in the question and answer that her mom loved meeting the T-shirt ladies. And I think that's true for everybody who attended the conferences as well. But before we wrap up, I do want to ask you about the future of the Hymn Society and what might be your fondest hope going forward for the Hymn Society. John, how about you first?
I hope that the Hymn Society can continue in its quest for diversity of material, whether it's ethnic diversity or whether it's into global music, whether it's by denomination, style. But I think the spreading out and capturing some of the fringe things that eventually end up becoming more than just fringe, but helping people understand them better and to offer insights into the meaning behind what we're doing. If we're doing global music, where did this song come from? How did it get to us? And all of that. Anything that the Hymn Society can do to help us in our teaching of new material to congregations to bring it to life rather than just put it in the bulletin and expect people to sing it. Whether it's old or young or new or newly composed or been around for 600 years, knowing something about the derivation of a hymn, how it was written, why it was written, the who, what, when, where, and how is so valuable, and it changes the way people sing the music. I mean, I'm back to Parker again. She always helped people realize the context of where this originated and why are we still singing it today. Why did some hymns disappear and we don't do them today? And what do we do with hymns that don't match some of our values today, like inclusive language? What do we do with Jesu joy of man's desiring? How do you make that inclusive? Do you rip apart its text and put it back together again, or do you find ways to educate the people that are singing and listening to what it was like then compared to what it's like now? All of those skills and all of that information and all of that teachability is something that the Hymn Society is grand at and has always been grand at. And I hope it continues.
Thank you. Gary, how about you?
I have, we've all been aware of how much the Loveless scholarships have done in introducing young people to the Hymn Society and producing our future leaders. We're seeing that already. But I wish we could provide some kind of financial aid for clergy and educators in local churches in the same way, because there's so many of us. Like, I had no hymnology course in seminary, and there's so many ways a minister or an educator can do to promote the use of hymns, encourage it. And I think so often of Austin Lovelace's comment that hymnody is always one generation away from extinction. And that's one reason I've been so interested and concerned about teaching hymns to children. And I hope that's another area that the Hymn Society will continue to support in as many ways as you can.
Thank you so much. This time has just flown by. I really am so grateful for this conversation, and I wish we had another hour to go, but we do need to wrap up. I want again thank both of you for taking the time to talk to everybody today, and I want to thank everyone who has been watching live, and those of you who are going to be watching on the recording too, for tuning in and hearing the really very stimulating conversation we've had today. So thanks, everybody. Next month, we'll be back with another interview. And in the meantime, have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.